Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kelly and I'm a hairstyling apprentice. I've been studying hair for the past 2 years, and for the last year I've been working at a salon full-time, so I wanted to share with you all of my tips and tricks in how I would execute a balayage ombre. I wanted to go over more of the theory side of it. If you want to see the more practical side, you can refer to my previous video, which I will have linked above somewhere and maybe even in the description below. So the first thing I want to go over is the main difference between a balayage ombre and a balayage highlight, because there is a major difference between them, and I feel like people can always get confused between the different terms. So basically, a balayage ombre is a solid progression of dark to light. So as you can see in the photo that I have over here on my iPad, this is a photo of an ombre that I did. This was actually a huge color correction, so please don't mind the tone. It's not 100% perfect because my client had a lot of hair history, but it is a major improvement on what she came in with before. But anyways, this is the balayage ombre, because as you can see at the root, she still has her natural color. And then going down, it kind of just blends. And the main goal is for you to not be able to tell where her roots end and the blonde starts. So then as you can see, there's kind of like a middle transition shade into the lightest blonde pieces on the end. So then if I was to completely cover up the top part, you would see that the bottom is completely blonde. That is a balayage ombre. For contrasting, this would be a balayage highlight. So it has more of a traditional highlighted look with the blended root, obviously, which is the main point of a balayage. But a balayage highlight will still have strands of dark hair running throughout it. So it's gonna be more dimensional. So just to contrast it, if I was to cover up the top part of a balayage highlight, you would see that there's still dark strands running through the bottom of it. Now, if you're a client and you're looking to get your hair done, but you don't really know which is the best option for you, just at least try to narrow down which of these two looks you prefer before you go to get your hair colored. I mean, your hairstylist can definitely guide you in the right direction, but I feel like for those of you who have never done a balayage before, a balayage highlight was probably gonna be the best way for you to ease into it, whereas a balayage ombre like this is a much more dramatic look. This is also another example of a balayage ombre on straight hair. Here you can see the better transition from the dark natural like root color into like a middle, like a mid-tone color, and then on the ends that are ultra light. A lot of girls will actually transition from the balayage highlight to a balayage ombre over time because they feel like they want to get more and more light. So that is another option as well. You can talk to your client about their long-term hair goals as well, but not everybody has planned exactly what they want to do with their hair. So just take that into consideration. So this is what a balayage ombre would look like from the front view. Because as you can see, aside from like her dark roots, she's pretty much blonde all over. So that's going to be the kind of look I'm going to be showing you today on my head sheet. So I've loaded up my head sheet and I'm going to start in the back view. Just because when we foil, we typically start in the back section. So now what I like to do in the back is obviously just split it up down the middle. Just split it down the sides. So now what you do here is going to depend on the overall look that your client is going for. If they want a strong face frame, or if they want a lot of lightness around their hairline, you are going to have to pack in your foils when you first start, because even at the very nape, so like the back of the neck here, people think, oh, it's not going to be seen, but it actually does become the front of the hair, because if I pull out my hair and I pull it to the front, everything that's back here, you can see it now, right? So if you want a lot of lightness, you are going to have to pay really close attention around the entirety of the head. So the perimeter of the hairline is going to be the most important part if your client wants maximum lightness, especially if they want to feel light when they tie their hair up. So one of the main things I like to do is after sectioning off my hair, say this is my client and she has dark hair, because most of our clients typically do. Generally, the way that I like to start foiling is diagonal back sections. From the back view, it will kind of look like a V angle, right? So in hair school, we're taught to just kind of go up the head like this, right? But that's not what I really want to show you, because I feel like that's what most people come in understanding already. Because in hair school, they teach you that diagonal sections will create a softer blend, which is very true. But what if I told you that you can use that knowledge of the angles to a much smaller scale that makes a world of a difference? So I'm going to use a red color here. So what I am going to demonstrate is the way that I would weave out hair using my tail comb. So let's pretend that this is the motion of my tail comb. I would actually move my tail comb like that. So what's the difference? So I like to move my tail comb in small zigzag patterns like this, right? Typically in hair school, when we first start weaving any type of highlight, we're almost taught, or at least I was, to almost weave like this. I don't know about you guys, but when you start to weave highlighted hair, you almost go into the section of hair like down and then back up, down, back up, which can potentially create a more chunky result. I find that by drawing a zigzag onto the client's scalp with my tail comb creates more of a blend overall. Before I even start to back comb or anything, I personally find this is the way that works best for me. And another thing that's really important to note, or one thing that I actually thought about, is the difference in the way that you weave your sections. Because let's say when you are holding up the section of hair to paint it or to put lightener on it, you're putting elevation into your hair, right? Because elevation is something that for the longest time I assigned only to haircuts, but elevation also applies to color as well. Because when you are elevating the hair up and you're painting it while it's elevated, because of course you do need to have tension in the hair for you to paint the lightener onto the foil evenly, right? So when it's elevated, it's not gonna fall exactly the same way when the hair is at rest, right? When you're not touching it anymore. So one thing that I thought about is, let's say you weave like this diagonally. When the hair is resting, this line that I just drew straight across is gonna be the parts of the hair that are touching lightener, if that makes sense. Meanwhile, if I weaved like this, right, the more traditional highlighted way, if I drew a straight line, that means this area that I'm circling is all going to be highlighted, which could potentially be a very chunky look. But then if on the triangular side, the parts that I'm circling now are going to be the parts touching lightener, right? So which has a wider surface area? This one. The one with the wider surface area runs the risk of becoming more and more chunky. It's not that chunky is a bad thing, but if you're going for blends and if you're already going for such a solid look, my personal preference is to have a very soft, almost like undetectable blend when you're going for an ombre. Because a lot of people think ombre, they think of like the old school box ombre kits where it's literally just black and then like blonde and it's just like a harsh line in between. That's exactly the look that we don't want. And I feel like all this knowledge that I put into my hair is kind of what differentiates me from just someone doing hair at home, because I went to school, I studied this, and I continue to study this. So if you understand what I'm talking about, please give me a thumbs up and just let me know in the comments that this resonates with you. So moving back to the actual head, I always generally start at the nape of the head, or the nape, yeah, the back of the neck area. And just like in hair school, we're taught to go at a V angle. So I'm still gonna go at a V angle, but instead of doing the traditional weave, or like just representing it in a straight line like this, I actually want to draw the triangular pattern on my client's scalp. By doing that, that's how I get the better blend, like I explained earlier. So now if they wanted a really bright face frame, you would have to take super fine sections, almost like baby weaves or baby slices even, around their hairline. So you'd have to keep it really, really tight to the hairline first, and then start to angle it more so. So you can even play with how deep of a triangle pattern you go, right? Because there is a difference whether you go like smaller triangles and bigger triangles. Bigger triangles obviously means you are leaving more hair out, and then the smaller triangles just means that it's a finer weave. So I like to continue going up the head. And one thing to keep consistent, or an easy way to keep consistent sectioning, is to just always start your sections at the same level at center back. So if I know I want it to start here on the left and the right side, that's exactly where I'll start. That just makes it a lot easier for me to visualize and make sure that both sides are consistent. Okay, actually, I forgot to include the side sectioning from the back. Because generally, when I section off the hair, I will always start with the 4 quadrant sectioning. So from the side view, I always like to do a section from right behind the ear. So I like to continue going up the head in that V shape until I just about reach the crown area. So in hair school, we're taught to do this kind of triangular section as well. One thing that I like to do is try to save as many clips as possible. Like, I don't want to use clips unnecessarily. So I never like to section off the triangle beforehand, because I already have 2 clips holding up each half of the head. So I don't need a 3rd clip just for that little triangle, because naturally as I'm foiling, that triangle is going to become more and more prominent anyways. So in this little triangle here, I would actually foil straight across. Excuse me. So the reason for foiling straight across is because it allows the foils to kind of conform to the curvature of the head. So let's say I didn't do that, right? So nobody's head shape, yeah, I'm just gonna show you using the top of the head, for example. Nobody's head shape is like this, right? You still have a curve of the head. So by doing the kind of straight across in that triangular section, you're creating a shape that's more so like this, rather than a V shape, right? So what that results in is a more natural result, because I find I've never done it before where you would just go up straight in a V shape, but let's say your client doesn't want a shadow root. Sometimes people are against it, or it's kind of like a weird flex for stylists to say, I can do a balayage and not have to shadow root it. So I find that if I am trying to challenge myself and I don't want to shadow root something and I can just get away with using a toner for the blonde parts of the hair, this is the way that I would do it. So yeah, you're creating more of like a rounded shape like this on the head as opposed to this. Okay. So then another thing that you might notice as you go up on that triangle section is that your foils aren't going to be wide enough. So you have two options here. In this instance, you could either flip your foils around so that they become wider and just paint the whole thing like that, or you could do what I do, where just continue going up and then leaving some hair out. So let's say this last section that I did in this triangle is about as wide as my foil can be. So then what I would do in this instance is just keep foiling up the top of the head, leaving some space on the side. So now what about all the hair that's left out in here, in the two circles? So that hair that's left out, I will paint the ends, but I will paint it at a lower plane than I did in this triangle right there. By doing that, I ensure that you're gonna see differentiation in the levels. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just show you in the close-up. So in a real world, or I guess like a real example on someone's head, notice how the blonde, some pieces are higher and some pieces are lower, right? That helps with the blend overall, because you don't want to see just a harsh straight line. So if I zoom in, yeah, I wouldn't say this is 100% perfect, but this is just one of the examples that I can give you in the terms of highs and lows. Because when you paint each foil, you don't want to paint exactly to the same level and do every foil the exact same, because if you do that, even if your blends are on point, like in terms of like your lightener, even if that is on point, you're still gonna see a straight line across between the blonde and the black, which isn't what you want, right? So now you have two options. After you finish foiling the whole back area, I generally like to completely finish foiling the back before I move on to the sides or anything like that. So you know how, remember how I said when you're weaving, you are leaving some hair out? So all the hair that you've left out, if you were doing a balayage highlight, you could just leave it as it is. But because I'm doing an ombre, I'm doing a more solid look, right? So all the hair that you've left out that's in between every foil, pull them to the side and combine them together. Now what you don't want to do is create one huge section of hair and just paint that. Because if your client has dark hair or they have really high hair density, it's going to be super warm if you do it that way. So take those low lights, or the hair that's in between the foils, and make smaller sections of it and foil those sections as well. But obviously, because they're like your natural low light, you are going to have to paint them ending at a lower plane. So that's how you get the highs and the lows here, right? Because notice how if I zoom in right in between here, even though she has blonde in here, if I look really close, there's darker strands. But then as I go lower and lower, it's really light. So that eventually all the hair on the ends become really blonde. So let's say we finish foiling the back and we did the highs and the lows. I'm just gonna quickly do the sectioning for the back here, and then I'll show you what I do on the sides. Okay, so for the sides, really easy. Some people will do kind of like a mohawk section on the top. So let's say, okay. So instead of doing the center back, what a lot of people will do is actually a mohawk section like this and then do the sides, right? Generally, I don't really do that just because I'm a very short person. So in terms of like physical comfort, I don't like to have to, I guess, hunch over or like go on my tiptoes just to see the top of my client's head. So one way that I've done that, or one way that I've tried to mitigate that, is just split the hair down the middle and then work on the sides. Now it is going to be a little bit harder because I am going to have to keep in mind consistency on both sides. So after I finish one side and I move on to the next side, I do have to be mindful of my section sizes and the number of foils I'm putting in. Now, if the client has a center parting, this is going to be even more imperative to make sure that both sides are even. If they have a slightly off center parting, if they have a side parting, they're not going to have the same amount of hair on both sides anyway. So I don't really mind that because I'm pretty confident that the hair is going to blend regardless. So what I like to do on the sides is, if they wanted a lot of brightness around their face, is to keep it really tight around their hairline. So follow the shape of their hairline. So I'm just going to show you an example here. So all this red is going to be a fine baby light. So baby light is just like, it's a term that's used to describe like a really, really fine weave. So it should be fine enough that if you were to put a newspaper under that section of hair, you could still read it. That's how fine it should be. So remember how I was talking about how important the perimeter of the hairline is? You would typically have to break up this section into numerous foils. So that's one foil, this is 2 foil, and that's 3 foils. Sometimes 4 depending on their hairline. So I'm just gonna move on to the front section just to give you further example. So let's say the client wants a strong money piece. What I typically do is, especially if they part in the center or slightly off center, you want to make sure that there's as much balance as possible. So for a money piece, what I will typically do is take a triangular section like that, and then right at the hairline in my red, I'm trying to show you, I do a baby slice. So the first foil, baby slice. And I'm not cheesing it, it's exactly the way that it is. Baby slice meaning I'm not weaving it, it's just a solid chunk of hair, but it's very, very fine. Because I still want to be able to see through it. So this is going to be for, depending on the client and how much hair they have, this is typically going to be mostly baby hairs anyways, so this is going to be very fine. So you should take into account what volume or what developer you're using with your lightener. If you know that this part of the head is very delicate, go in with the lightest developer that you possibly can, especially if you know that they're going to be processing for a while. So the first foil is a baby slice. And then now I would go on to the second foil, and the second foil would be baby weave. So it would be a baby weave that I would back home very slightly. Sometimes I don't even back home, but most of the time I do, just to ensure an even better blend. So when I say deep tease versus shallow tease, all that means is how low you start to back home onto the strand of hair. So let's say this is the strand of hair that I'm back homing. If I was to start back homing from here and then move up, that's a very deep tease. But if I start somewhere in the middle and then push it up, that's a shallow tease. So that's what I mean by shallow versus deep tease. So in the second foil, it could be a shallow tease. And then in the third foil, go back to doing a baby slice. baby slice deep tease. So in this last foil, it's the furthest onto the head, right? Before you get into like the flat top of the head. So if you were to do the money piece moving back, you want it to kind of flow with the rest of the hair, because typically the halo part, or like the crown part of the hair, is where you're going to preserve the most of your natural darkness or your natural root color. So you want it to flow. So because it's the furthest foil in that money piece area, that's why I would do a deeper tease, just to preserve more of that natural depth, and then paint it lower as well. So even in all of these three foils, the first two foils, I would say paint it all the way up to the root, and then in the third one, maybe feather it up, but keep a little bit more of the natural depth. And my reason for that is because a lot of my clients have naturally dark hair, so I would rather them feel too light at the front, because we could always shadow root it down, as opposed to spending 4 to 6 hours doing a service and then they don't feel light enough at the end, because it's going to be much harder to correct that than it is to correct something at the front where they feel it's too high, it's too bright or something. So I would rather put in a darker shadow root than to have to shampoo cocktail out a toner that's too dark or something like that at the end. So now moving on to the side view. So remember everything that I talked about in that little triangle section. Right? Okay, and then that's from the same view. So now what I like to do on the side view is actually just do diagonal back sections. So if this section is too wide, right, because typically it will be, you can break it up into two different foils like that. That's generally what I would do. And then I notice there's too much hair being left out here, put in another foil there, and then continue on with that. So this part is probably going to be your widest section. Just split it up into two foils. So one foil, two foil. And just keep going up like that. Because I find that doing angular sections and then doing the zigzag on top, that's gonna be how you get the best blend. At least in my opinion, that's how I get the best result. Okay, and then for the top down view, I'm just basically doing the same thing that I showed you before. So baby light around the hairline, baby weave, and then baby slice again. Right? And then here, I'm trying to think, diagonal back would be something like this. Because from a top-down view, what you eventually want to see is kind of like a diamond shape. So now within this diamond shape is where I'm going to preserve as much of the natural darkness as I can. So as I've illustrated in this kind of diamond shape area, because I need darkness in order to balance the light, right? Because if I just have light everywhere, that's a global bleach out and that's not the same look. So if I was to use a real world example, I would use something like this, for example, where you can see that she has darkness at the back view, but it's like, you can almost visualize a diamond shape if you were to look at the top of her head from a bird's eye view. Right? Because even though, yes, there's some highs and there's some lows in there breaking it up, you can generally see a diamond shape of darkness in there, even from the front view, because you can see that she has a lot of brightness in the very, very front of her hairline, where that like face frame or that money piece is. But then as I move towards the back here, I see a little bit more darkness left in intentionally, because I do need to have a little bit of that contrast between the light and the dark in order to create that seamless blend. So yeah guys, that completes my first kind of like head sheet video. I hope this wasn't too overwhelming for you guys. I hope you could follow me and understand everything that I was talking about. And I will see you next time, maybe with another video on another technique or another look. Maybe something that's a little bit more natural. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.